Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's session, VC Diversity Data Transparency Regulations and Opportunities for Impact. My name is Daniel Anzueto, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's session. If this is your first time attending one of our workshops, let me provide some context on StartOut. StartOut accelerates the growth of the LGBTQ+ community to drive our economic empowerment, building a world where every LGBTQ+ entrepreneur has equal access to lead, succeed, and shape the workforce of the future. I'm excited to introduce our host for today, Annie Brown. Annie Brown is the founder and CEO of Reliable, a B2B SaaS company dedicated to building inclusive AI solutions. She also serves as an AI researcher and entrepreneur in residence at UC San Diego. Annie's significant contributions to technology and inclusion have led her to participate in a White House roundtable on LGBTQ+ venture capital allocation. Recognized as one of the 100 innovative entrepreneurs by Gangels, she has also been honored with the Eddie Windsor Coding Award by Lesbians Who Tech. Previously, Annie contributed her expertise on AI advances as a writer for Forbes. The floor is yours, Annie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love StartOut, been involved for a long time, but this is my first session with StartOut, so excited for it. You've probably heard like a lot of buzz about some of these VC regulations. So today's session, we're diving into one specific type of VC regulation, which is the data transparency, and talking about more in detail what's going on in different states. I'm going to go through the presentation, and then at the end we can do questions, but also feel free to put questions in the chat, and Danny can may keep track of those for later. So let me share my screen. Share. Okay. All right. So, I think a really good place to start is, well, I guess a good place to start would be me. So we get a little bit of a bio here, but I've been working at Reliable now for about 2 years, and Reliable is closely working with the bill writers in California, but the bill writers who are also working in New York to make some of these data transparency bills. And Reliable is a data transparency company, so it's a natural fit. Also, myself being an entrepreneur who has explicitly been denied funding because of my identity status, I was told to tone it down because the LPs of that specific VC firm were conservative or from foreign countries, and so they don't, necessarily want to support LGBTQ founders. And so that kind of started my journey on this of being a huge advocate for VC reform. I think, and a key theme you'll see through this is that reform doesn't have to be a burden. I, for one, see it as a huge opportunity for VCs to have better performance of their portfolios, especially since the data have shown us that diverse portfolios perform better. So let's start with some definitions. So data transparency refers to the openness and accessibility of information related to company metrics, as well as data collection, processing, usage, and sharing. So not only are you seeing these, you're making data more transparent, so I can go and I can see a VC's DI statistics, but then I'm also able to see how is this data being collected? So me as a founder, how is this data collected? How is it being used? And that's something that Reliable is helping some of these bill writers and some of the lawmakers kind of navigate. So some of these, I guess, headlines you see here are talking about data transparency from different perspectives. I think a lot of us think of DEI or have seen DEI initiatives from HR perspectives. It's already been long withstanding that there's diversity protections for large corporations. Large corporations are starting to have to publish their DEI data. So it's actually a natural progression that this would come to the VC industry. It actually already happened with the board diversity. So NASDAQ boards need to report gender diversity. One thing you'll also see is that there's a lot of opposition to some of this data. The board's regulations are already being challenged. We got the Fearless Fund or kind of ruling happening or lawsuit happening. So there's a lot of things around DEI that are happening, but we're going to just focus on what's happening, what the critiques are, and then what are some practical ways that, you know, VCs and founders can address this. So just a really quick overview of how lawmakers are thinking about DEI data transparency for VC firms. So in California, Senate Bill 54 has passed, and that takes effect March 2025. So that's where I'm going to be spending most of the focus of this presentation, is talking about SB 54, because that has passed. VCs will need to adhere to it. And what you'll learn today is it's not just for California VCs. If you have even just one portfolio company that is based in California or has operations in California, you have to report the diversity data for your entire portfolio. And I think that's something that's a bit overlooked when talking about the bill. So I will emphasize that multiple times. Then in New York, the Diversity in Investment Act is actually currently in committee. So I'll be talking more about kind of where that progress is, but that I would say is likely to pass. So, you know, New York VC firms, get ready because it's coming. And then Massachusetts is interesting because the efforts for data transparency regulation have stalled. There's quite a strong opposition to that there, but a recent bill has passed or is in deliberation currently that is against basically or prevents discrimination or harassment of founders. So it really focuses a lot on sexual harassment in VC. I'll share links of how you can learn more about that later in the presentation. All right, so I'm going to play a quick clip from a woman I admire. She's one of the bill writers of SB 54 and is helping to push some of these data transparency laws into other states. This quote here I thought does a great job of summing up why this is important. SB 54 takes a crucial step towards rectifying the inequity in venture funding by establishing accurate data collection and public availability to foster accountability and progress. As we know, for the founders in the audience and the VCs in the audience know, data-driven decisions are the best kind of decisions you can make. And so this idea of collecting this data is a first step in really starting to address some of the huge inequities in VC that all of us know about. All right, so I'm going to play this clip.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for letting me come and testify today. My name is Allison Byers. I'm the founder of a tech startup called Scroobius. We are an AI-powered platform that connects diverse founders with investors. We've helped over 550 founders, the majority of whom identify as underrepresented, create their pitch material for fundraising. And we have witnessed the bias and injustice that they face in the fundraising process. I have experienced this personally many times, and it is why I started this company. So we see this injustice reflected in the numbers that we've all heard today, where of the $238 billion of venture capital allocated in 2022, women got 1.7% of that, Black founders less than 1%, Black women less than 0.35% of that money. I challenge you to find another industry or resource in our country that has that level of disparity. This data comes from trusted sources like PitchBook and Crunchbase, yet they rely on industry partners and news sources because funds are not required to report their diversity metrics. And despite an increase in public rhetoric, 8 out of 10 investors view the funding landscape as balanced. Those investors are general partners of funds, and they manage money that comes from endowments, wealthy individuals, pensions like CalPERS and other fiduciary backers? Is that where those investors want their money going? So we have witnessed the positive impact of other bills that require data reporting in areas like board composition and diversity in the workplace. This bill takes a crucial step toward rectifying the inequities in the funding landscape of venture capital by establishing accurate measurement and public availability that will foster accountability and progress. California is responsible, I'm going to wrap up. California is responsible for 36% of US venture funding, so this will have a global impact. I'm going to close now. I'm testifying today because this is deeply personal to me. This issue as a female founder representing a community of hundreds of underrepresented entrepreneurs, and I'm proud to support SB 54. I hope you will be too. Thank you for your time.
So, from that clip, you got a lot of good background about, sort of why this is important. Some of the reasons why it matters. This is the first US legislation for VC diversity. So this is initiating efforts to enhance diversity in the venture capital sector. So this is just the start. We're all still learning. We're gonna, work together as VCs, as associations, as founders to really figure out what this means. But this is the first legislation we have to really start moving VC diversity forward. It provides insights into the distribution and financial aspects of venture capital investments. So what you'll see in my next overview is that you're not just getting the percentage of how many diverse founders you have, but you also are required, VCs are required to report the financial allocations as well. So we'll actually start getting specific numbers as to, how much money are women founders getting, how much money are LGBTQ founders getting. And then when we look at LGBTQ performance of companies versus white, straight, cis men performance of companies, we can kind of see, okay, like an LGBTQ founded company did this much, or they did this much with this much money, which will just show, kind of the performance of diverse founders. Also, this helps evaluate the influence of diversity on investment decisions. So I saw a great question from Richard in the chat. How do we convince VCs to view diversity-related regulations and opening up viable commercial opportunities rather than legal compliance headache? So I think, one of the key things that I'll talk more about is that we're gathering this data, and the data will speak for itself in a lot of ways. I think, like what Allison was saying, a lot of the data we have about founder performance and how much money they get are coming from not so reliable sources. But once we're able to show that, oh, okay, I'm collecting this additional data point for my portfolio, and so I can actually start to make better decisions in my portfolio because I have shown in my portfolio, not from national data or not from some survey that the New York Times did, I'm able to see from my portfolio data that diverse teams perform better. So I'm going to just continue that trend, not because I have to comply, but because it's for the best of my portfolio. So this is the nitty gritty. If you are a VC, pay attention to this. If you're a founder, this is also really important to know because you'll be able to understand, and I'll talk more why founders or why VCs will start to collect this data from you. So what this tracks the count and total dollar amount of venture capital investments to businesses with diverse founding teams. And the categories are gender, race, ethnicity, disability status, LGBTQ status, and veteran status as a percentage of all investments made in the previous year. One definition that's really important here is that founding teams is broadly defined. So in a way, like it's, and I'll talk, I have office hours where we can dive more into the specifics, but essentially the bill defines it as a founding team member as having a significant stake in the company. So you do want to get your co-founders, but it's important to note that it's probably best, and just for compliance sake, to get the diversity of the whole team. Now, it doesn't have to be their contractors, but anybody who's a full-time employee, their advisors, it's important to collect this data. So just keep that in mind when you're collecting the data. It's not just the founders, you also want to collect the data of the whole team. Privacy and voluntary participation. So the data is aggregated. One really important part of this bill is that VCs cannot be able to directly correlate a survey response to a specific founder. And that makes it tricky for specific portfolio performance. And I'll talk about that when we talk about data collection tools. But it is really important, especially for the LGBTQ community. Right now, it's if a VC firm is collecting diversity data, they are probably, and I know this because I've talked to a lot of VCs about this, they are most likely collecting it with Google Sheets. And so if I report that I am bisexual and gender fluid, something that I honestly don't tell everybody in my life, I then report that, and then that goes into a Google Sheet that, you know, how Google Sheets happen, they get passed around from whoever, whatever intern is there. There's no privacy or security around collecting this diversity data now. And that's another really important part of this law, is that diversity data is starting to be looked at more like health data. And then public access to reports. So demographic reports will be accessible on the department's website. It's currently still being defined which agency in California is going to be in charge of this data, but the data should also be available on the VC's website. So covered entities, who needs to comply with this? So VC companies with connections to California and engage in specific investment activities. So a VC, as defined by the bill, must invest in startups, early stage or emerging growth companies, or manage assets for third parties, including state or local pension systems. So as Danny mentioned in my bio, I'm going to a White House roundtable actually tomorrow. That's why I'm reporting from DC. And Start Out will be there as well. And one of the things we're going to be asking about is for these bills to be a little bit more specific of what this means. Because as of right now in the bill, technically an angel syndicate could be affected by this bill. Even angels could. But when I talk directly to the lawmakers, the intention is for venture capital firms. So those are going to be the ones that are being, I guess, like where the bill is being enforced. But making this language more specific helps everybody understand it a little bit better. And then here is the trick. I will emphasize this again. For this specific bill, the VC needs to be headquartered in California or have a significant presence or operational office in California. So for example, you know, there's some firms that might have an accelerator in California or a branch in California. Those will still need to report the diversity of their whole firm. Invest in businesses based in or operationally significant to California. So a lot of startup companies, tech startup companies have operations in California, work in California. So that's why this California bill is going to impact VCs nationwide, or solicits or receives investments from California residents. So if some of your LPs are California residents, this law applies to you as well. So some points about opposition. There are groups not necessarily working towards completely rolling back this bill, but making some significant edits to the bill. And so basically, but the problem is when you ask for significant edits, sometimes the whole bill gets thrown away. So one of the things I'll be talking about next is like, how can we use the tools that we use to collect this data to actually address some of these concerns. So data quality concerns. Is self-reporting accurate? Privacy concerns. Will the data be protected? And burden on small VC firms. Some argue that this disproportionately impacts smaller, newer VC firms with extensive compliance requirements. However, the majority of VCs that have really come out in support of this bill are actually small VC firms, because small VC firms a lot of times are run by diverse VCs themselves. So I want to kind of transition to, oh, let me go to this one. So basically, when you're talking about the data collection, so that's overview of the bill. And now let's get to the practical matters. How do I actually go about collecting this data in a way that's not a huge burden and in compliance? One tricky thing about the bill is that you really can't use Google surveys unless you go through a lot of hoops to make sure that the data is private, to make sure you, the VC, can't see the data. So that's why there's a huge opportunity for tools of this space. So Reliable is actually building a tool currently to essentially just help with this. You know, we are involved in data transparency. We're passionate about this. So, and we've talked to a lot of LGBTQ founders, LGBTQ VCs, VCs from different backgrounds, diverse VCs that are passionate about this, and we're working with lawmakers. So we want to put our expertise in the ring to try to help address the problem in a practical way. So let me just show you really quick what a possible solution for this looks like. So one thing is that the bill does not require investors to report their diversity data, but we wanted to include that in this because that's sort of the direction that things are going, that VCs will start to have to report their diversity data. So you create this. Another important part of the bill is that essentially you have to report the diversity data for each one of your funds. So what Reliable did was we developed a way where the fund category would then be connected to which founders are in those funds. So you add your fund, you add the different funds that are within your investment vehicle, and then those are coordinated to the founders. You add your portfolio company, you select which fund that they're a part of, and then you add their company, and you can add as many as you want or upload from a CB. So then you create your profile, you create your investor profile, and then this is where you can start to do your tags. And this is where kind of Reliable's approach comes in, because we allow these tags. You're basically like kind of annotating yourself and building your profile. So if I put that, I put that I'm in California, and then basically you set up a profile here that then has your tags in it and then shows your DEI data. So then once you set up your profile, you have essentially this dashboard where you can see which companies are here, and then you generate a report. And the report looks something like this. This is not Chasing Rainbow's actual data, because Chasing Rainbows is 100%, but essentially it's a very simple report that you can put on your website and show how much you've invested, what's the breakdown. So just kind of thinking about, okay, this doesn't have to be, I think a lot of times VCs look at this as a huge burden, but really with the right tools, it doesn't have to be. This is what a founder gets when they're invited. They get the opportunity to then fill out their different status, and then they get a dashboard as well. And the dashboard is really interesting for founders because it essentially allows them to control who sees their data. And this is another cool thing. And one thing that we've found from founders is that they don't want to have to fill out, if this becomes a regulation, they don't want to have to fill out hundreds of surveys for every investor they get. They want to then fill out one survey, and then I can say, okay, I approve Chasing Rainbows to see my diversity data. The important thing is that all this information is aggregated, and then the way that we've actually built this is that it is HIPAA compliant. So that means that all of the diversity data is treated like health data and is hyper secure. So, one second, okay. All right, we are just going to go in this view. So how to support the California Data Transparency Bill. One thing that the bill makers are asking is that VCs share their support of the diversity data collection with the bill team. So if you can share your stories of saying, you know, I've started using this tool to collect my diversity data and it's working really well. It's not a burden for me. Or you can say, I really support this. I'm currently looking for a tool to collect this, but I don't mind because I know that it's going to enhance my portfolio performance. And I think the VC ecosystem will be better off having more diversity, things like that, because I think a lot of the opposition is coming at this from the perspective of VCs don't want this, you know, founders don't want this. So they need people to start supporting that collecting this data is a really important first step, and addressing some of those opposition points that if the data collection is done well, with intention, it can be done accurately and it can be done without burden. One second. Okay. So then with the New York Data Transparency Bill, with that bill, again, it's important to share your support for the New York legislation with the build team. So if you want to write me or, you know, write a message to start out, we can get that to the build team that they can start sharing with lawmakers. The other thing you can do specifically for the New York Data Transparency Bill is you can support the Venture Access Alliance. I believe they still are accepting members. So if you are a VC based in New York, look into the Venture Access Alliance. The Massachusetts Discrimination Protection Bill. Like I said, the Data Transparency Bill in Massachusetts is delayed. So if, but that discrimination bill is also a really great first step. So I'm going to put this link in the chat. And this is basically just a sign of support for the bill. It also goes into explaining the bill a little bit more. So just in summary, SB 54 fosters accountability and progress in venture funding by establishing precise data collection and public disclosure requirements. It also enhances portfolio performance by using demographic data to identify and bridge diversity gaps in their investments. And then it also embraces transparency in demographic data. So VCs are able to rebuild trust with founders. I personally know that a lot of minority founders have started to give up on the VC industry, honestly, and they're turning a lot more to angels, financing. And so the VC industry is missing out on a lot of deal flow because of these, statistics. And I also will to mention that as important as it is for policy, the tool that we use for collecting this data, I believe, is equally important. So whether it's reliable or not, the tool needs to be built by marginalized founders. Founders, I believe, are the best ones to execute a tool like this because you want something that's user-friendly. You don't want this to necessarily go to a nonprofit or a government agency that then outsources it to people who aren't familiar with the agency. And also it's really important. And one thing that we believe really strongly or reliable is if you build for the most marginalized groups. So if we build this product for, say, you know, that it really well serves Black trans founders, then that's going to mean it's a better tool for everybody. So that co-designing process and having a diverse team actually build the data collection tool and having diverse input into the tool is going to be important because you're dealing with a lot of sensitive data here. So you want to make sure that you're handling it correctly. Okay, and then this last slide, this QR code, if you use that, you can book an office hours with me. I just created a DEI policy office hours. We can talk about if you want to get involved with some of these bills. Like I said, we have a direct contact to the bill team and some of the other policy advocates. co-designing data collection. So like I was just talking about, this idea of how do you gather data from the most marginalized, and then use that data to build really great tools, build progress and future outlook. So, you know, like I said, there is opposition to the bill. What's going to happen? We can, you know, talk about that and how to stay updated. There is also a connection to the Fearless Fund lawsuit, precise data collection requirements. So if you just want a full rundown of exactly what data I need to collect, happy to do that. Related, talking to planning for March 2025, which is coming up sooner rather than later. And especially if you're a venture capitalist from a large portfolio, that's important. And then founder initiatives. How can founders advocate for this? There's definitely ways, and we've been working with this with Reliable, that founders actually can start the process by putting their diversity data in a profile and then starting to already share that with their investors. So this can be a bottom-up process as well. Okay, so happy to go over any of the slides in more detail, and also answer questions.
Fantastic, Annie. Thank you so much for that very needed presentation. For folks that are with us, you're welcome to drop questions either in the chat, or if you would like to unmute and ask directly. I think I can start us off, Annie. Some of the things that we've talked about as well as, you know, this is the start of the conversation, which I appreciate to keep the conversation going. We have to think about, you know, as founders, how is this going to help you look for VCs that are more inclusive, more representative? Have you heard any of those kinds of conversations coming up?
Yes, actually. So one group that we're working with, that's we're doing a pilot for, Generator. They're actually the nation's most diverse accelerator group. They were saying that one thing they really want to think about is a badge that you could start putting on your profile as a VC. So let's say I collect my diversity data, I hit a certain threshold of percentage of founders and percentage of funds raised, I can actually get like a stamp or a certification on my profile. So then founders see that and they say, oh, okay, this isn't just, you know, me putting on my landing page a stock photo of people holding hands and saying, you know, we support diverse founders. This is actually the data to support that my time isn't wasted by talking to this group. So I think certifications is one, and then also PR is another one. You know, I think there's more and more press interest around these laws, around VC diversity, around some of these founders coming up. So if founders, you know, talk about your venture capital firm positively in the context of venture capital diversity, that's great. If they don't talk about it positively, that can have long-term effects. So I think both PR and the certifications are two ways of starting to build trust with founders.
Fantastic. And I know you talked a little bit about this, but Richard put this in the chat as well, of thinking about how do we look at this diversity related work that we have to do as like commercial opportunities. You've already said it, potentially a badge. Rather than legal compliance headaches, any insights that you can share with folks who might be on the call that work at VCs or investors that are like, hey, I don't have the capacity to do this right now, but I want to be representative and I want folks to understand maybe some of the initial steps or things that they should be thinking about now?
Yeah, so, well, one thing is that with Reliable, we offer the software for free for any venture capital firm with managing under 10 million. So if you are managing under 10 million, you can just start using the software for free. And then I think also with kind of going back to what I know about what we've learned building the Reliable software is that the analytics is super important, right? So with when we're collecting data, we're not just collecting the diversity data, we're also collecting your company data. So diversity is a very, I guess, broad term, and we think about it in those huge categories, and the law thinks about it in those huge categories. But with tools like Reliable, or even if you're using another tool, you can actually break it down to be a little bit more specific. So like on the Reliable dashboard, we've got how many women founders do I have that are in AI companies? And so, because it could be that all your women founders are doing consumer products, which doesn't necessarily diversify your portfolio. VCs are always talking about diversifying their portfolio, but this is a way to actually diversify your portfolio with diversity, in the sense that you can really get into the gritty of how do I actually create a diverse portfolio, not just, okay, we've got 50% women founders, we've got 20% BIPOC founders. How can I say I want founders representing across the board? And so I think the analytics that you can get out of this data is really important. And another cool thing that I didn't mention, but that VCs are starting to use AI tools for their due diligence and for just basically how they sort their companies and how they make decisions. So without this diversity data piece in that machine learning training sessions, you're going to miss out on, you're going to have a non-accurate and not well-performing algorithm. So because it's all based on historical data, which, as we know, historically hasn't been great for diverse founders. So one of the things we're working on at Reliable is to really advocate for bringing diversity data into machine learning algorithms. So this aggregated data that's already public online, how can we start using that to then inform some of these algorithms that VCs are starting to use?
Yeah, I love that cyclical process, that by collecting the data, we're making the process of data collection even better. That's fantastic. I
Yeah,
have two more
exactly.
questions, but also if folks want to drop questions in the chat, please feel free. So this is implemented in March 2025. What does
Yes.
March 2030 look like for you? So let's say this is successful. Everybody's like,
Yes.
all right, cool, diversity, we got to do it. We'll report it. Everybody's moving forward with it. It becomes obviously California, New York, we're looking at. So 2030, what do you see as some potential impacts of this going positively?
Yeah, so I think the first step, like we said, is collecting the data. The next step is really looking at the data to see exactly how bad it is. So if in, let's say, 2026, we have taken a year to really reflect on the data, we find that it's less than 2% for women founders. It's actually 0.5%, and it's 0.3% for founders of color. I mean, that's going to be really eye-opening, I think, for us to say, okay, this is an industry that needs regulation. And I know for industries, regulation is a bit of a scary word, but if you think about it, if those percentages are so low, there's something broken that actually, if fixed, could present much larger returns for these funds. So I think what I see in 2030 is that from the data, we've been able to establish some regulations that help push VCs to open up a little bit of the types of founders they consider. And we're actually seeing data, because we're collecting the data, that opening up has increased portfolio performance. There's more money in the funds. There's more money to put back into the founders. So that's what I'm really hoping that this all leads to.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And then I think leading into, if you want to share more insights, we're excited that you'll be at the White House. At Start Out, we'll be at the White House as well. Would love to learn a little bit. I know this is just one part of that full conversation. Anything else you want to share about that?
Yeah, so it's very exciting. Patrick Driscoll from Chasing Rainbows has worked really hard over the past year to put this together. It's the first of its kind. So this is the first time. Well, so previously there was Black in VC was able to create that roundtable, and it actually produced some really great results moving forward on some pieces of legislation, also just educating the executive branch on what's going on in VC. And so we're hoping to kind of recreate some of that success for the LGBTQ community. Things that are going to be talked about in that session are going to be diversity data collection and regulation, but then also getting more funding to LGBTQ funders. So what does that look like? Because it's about both getting funding to LGBTQ founders and funders. So how can we support the overall LGBTQ VC ecosystem? Another thing is talking about bringing more LGBTQ founders and investors into some of the discussions around these policies, because policymakers might not be super familiar with the intricacies. And then when it comes to like the practical application of this, so getting founders and funders on committees and more LGBTQ representation overall in the discussion. And I think for us, that's a super important part of the piece of this diversity discussion, because when it comes to LGBTQ, like I said before, if I'm an LGBTQ founder, say based in Uganda, there's a much different implication of me coming out and saying who I am on a form than, you know, maybe somebody in California, but there's still stigmas across the world. So how can we make founders comfortable in who they are and still kind of move the needle forward? So those are some of the key pieces, but there will be White House officials there. And I know that there is rumblings of trying to bring some sort of VC reform to a federal level as well.
That's very exciting. Awesome. Perfect. I think we're good with questions from folks, unless anybody has anything else to put in. Last thoughts. What is the one thing that we should know from this conversation that we should be ready for?
Yeah, I think the thing that you should be ready for, and this whole industry should be ready for, is it's going to happen. I mean, I think there's been enough momentum, enough push, and it's just something that's happening across industries. So the odds of this happening to, you know, like DEI reporting being required for every industry except VC would be very rare. So I would say, even say, you know, this bill got set back, or the bill in New York doesn't pass, these laws will come into place eventually. And I think these VC firms, by learning more about this, should start to realize, like, okay, even if it's not a compliance issue, even if I don't have to report this because I'm afraid of $100,000 fine, I should be reporting this because it's better for the health of my portfolio. If I start collecting this data, I can make better decisions. So do it because you're going to be required to do it sooner or later. And then also do it because your portfolio health and portfolio performance will benefit.
Fantastic, Annie. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We wish you much luck and success tomorrow at the White House. Thank you for representing us, along with our CEO, Brian, and Patrick will be there as well, amongst other folks. We will have Annie back a few more times over the next few months as we figure out what's coming in March 2025 and helping our community get ready for it. So, Annie, thank you again, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love this.